Thank you very much. Yeah, very happy to be here, and feel free to ask as many questions as you'd like. Really looking forward to hear your thoughts and comments. So this paper is about waiting lists, and we're gonna tell you about some sort of price discovery process that happens in waiting list and some connection to stochastic gradient descent. Hopefully this will all be clear in 5 minutes. And this is joint work with Itai Shlagi, Pengushan, and Amin Saberi. Pengushan is actually graduated from Columbia and is now in Purdue. And he's like, if you have technical questions and you really want to know the nuts and bolts, like I have to ask him the hard questions. So what are we doing in this paper? So there's a lot of things that are allocated through waiting lists, like organs, public housing. Like waiting lists are very common, or queues are a very common way of allocating items when you can't use just use prices. And at a high level, you can just think that waiting lists replace prices with waiting costs. So there is going to be a price for the different items. Like some apartments, some public housing apartments are better than others. How do we rush and who gets the better apartment and who gets the worst one? Well, if you want the better one, you need to wait more. In some sense, it's very much like a price. The difference from prices that we're going to focus on in this paper is that in general settings where you use prices, somebody sets the price, or there's some way of kind of like some way of setting the price. In waiting list, nobody sets a price. In a queue, nobody says the wait for this queue should be 7. The wait for this queue should be 5. The way that's like the queues kind of calibrate or like determine how long the agent should wait is an endogenous process, which we're going to think about as a price learning process. How long should the wait should be for apartment A versus apartment B? Well, that depends how people come in queue. If a lot of people come in queue for one apartment, then the waiting cost for that apartment will gradually go up. And eventually you'll get something that will get waiting costs for the various apartments. And what we want to ask in this paper is, what does this process look like? Does it look like a reasonable way to reach good prices? And is there loss associated with the fact that we don't just set the optimal waiting times, whatever they should be, or market waiting times? And let me jump straight. If you have questions, feel free to ask at any time, but let me just jump straight to an example that hopefully will make those things much more concrete. Okay. So let me think of the simplest kind of allocation problem, which is like I have one item, heterogeneous valuations. Some agents should get the item, some not. The item arrives at some Poisson rate 1. Agents arrive at Poisson rate 2. So on average, I can assign half the agents. And what kind of drives the rationing? Which agents will get the item? They will have a queue. There's just a first come, first served queue. Agents can either join the queue or leave unassigned. When they come to the queue, they can see how many people are in the queue ahead of them. They will have quasi-linear utility, so they will see some price in terms of how much they need to wait. This W will depend on how many people are ahead of them in the queue. And I'm assuming that the value of the agents is just drawn from the uniform ID. And I just run this queue, and I want to see how much value am I generating from the assignment of agents in the queue. So before I tell you what happens in the queue, let's think of a benchmark. What would be the ideal thing here? I'm assuming that I want to maximize allocative efficiency. What would be the optimal thing if I could just freeze all the agents and items that arrive until some time t? What is the, like we're in CS seminar, what is the offline optimal? Well, if I just look at the offline optimal, it's pretty clear, like it's just a static allocation problem. I want to assign the agents that have the maximal value on average I can assign half the agents, so that would be the agents that have a value above half. And I could implement this by just setting a market clearing price equal to a half, which kind of tells me also in the dynamic problem, I could optimally solve the problem if just I would make sure that all the agents that arrive to the queue see a price equal to a half. If every agent that arrives to the queue sees an expected weight that's equal to a cost of a half, they will make the optimal decision of whether to join the queue or not. And any suboptimal allocation that I will get in the queue is just from like the fact that like some agents will not see the right price. Hence, like that price discovery in the paper, will the queue actually discover like that the price should be a half or not? Any questions?
So Jacob, I have a quick question. Like usually when we think about prices with money, these are just transfers, right? So the welfare is not harmed. But here actually these weightings are actually gone forever, right? It's not like prices in the sense that it doesn't keep total welfare the same.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm keep saying allocative efficiency explicitly to avoid this issue, to kind of like to say we're kind of interested in this paper in whether prices will reach the market clearing prices. There's another question of whether those are desirable or not. In some settings, I think it's okay to do that. If you think of public housing, the waiting time is a transfer, because like it's not that people waste money by signing up to a list, right? Whether you're on the waiting list for public housing or not, you still pay this cost. The way that like you can get maximal utilization from public housing is just to keep all the apartments full. As long as all the apartments are full, then really the waiting costs are just going to be transfers. Because you can't tell people, oh, take your name off the waiting list and then you won't have to pay rent anymore. Yeah. So in some settings, I think it's okay to really consider those as transfers, in some setting not, but we're gonna like think of those as a separate, those questions as separate issues and just ask what kind of prices will we get in the queue? Will we get the market clearing prices, or will we get some lower allocative efficiency on top of all the distortions that like pricing will have?
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. That's I'm keep waiting for these questions. Maybe I should have like said something myself. Yeah, Benjamin.
Yeah. So what you actually have here is a double-sided queue, right? Because it's more items arrive.
No, so if an item arrives and there's nobody around, I'm just throwing the item away.
Okay.
Yeah? And you'll see that doesn't matter, because that will never happen in the setting, in the under the parameters that I'm looking at. Okay? Let me just go to
as long as you assume a Poisson process, as long as you assume Poisson processes, there are always a positive probability. It is
possible, but it's going to be super rare. Okay? So look at I'm going to be interested in cases where items need to be rationed. There's more agents than items. So in another way to say it, where prices are positive, when the price should be positive. Okay. So here's the distribution for the example that I just talked about. Like there's twice as many agents arriving as items. The ideal the market clearing price is a half. Am I going to get queue length that corresponds to a price of a half? Well, this is the queue length that corresponds to a price of a half. Like that's 25 arrivals, given the waiting cost that they put on the previous slide. 25 arrivals, meaning that I have to wait for my own, plus 24. So 24 is the queue length that gives you the market clearing price. And you can see that prices are kind of concentrated around the price of a half. But there's also pretty significant dispersion. And there's a lot of stochasticity in the queue, and there's a chance that somebody will come to the queue and see there's only 15 agents ahead of them, corresponding to a price of 0.3, or 30 agents ahead of them, corresponding to a price of 0.6. So an agent arriving to the queue will see a randomly drawn price, and there's actually a pretty significant change in prices. And going back to Benjamin's question, you see that the probability that the queue will be empty here is very low. And so I'm not going to be concerned about that. Like items, technically, we throw away items if an item arrives to an empty queue, but it's going to be rare under.
So what is the y-axis?
That's the station. What I'm plotting here is the station distribution of the queue length. So the y-axis is the probability, is the PDF. Let me just close the thing. Yeah. So this is the PDF, the distribution of queue length. Yeah. And as you might expect, the queue is not going to converge to a deterministic length. It's going to grow in size and shrink with each arrival of agent and item. Agents arrive, the queue grows, and then an item arrives, and you may be arriving to the queue and be lucky or unlucky and see a variety of prices. Now, this translates to lower allocative efficiency, because I can take this chart, this stochastic distribution, translate it to the distribution of prices by scaling, just looking at the cost function that I did that I had here with this slide, just multiply by 0.02, get prices. And then I can get like a probability for each agent. Given the value of that agent, what is the probability that the agent will actually enter? If my value is 0.4, then most of the time the queue will be too long and I won't join, but there is a chance, like about 20% chance, that I will be lucky and get to a queue that's short enough, and then I will join. And of course, on average, I'm still assigning half the agents. So if I'm assigning some of the 0.4 plus, it must be balanced out by not assigning some others. And that's balanced out because if you look at the 0.6, there's about 20% chance that somebody with a value of 0.6 will come to the queue and see it randomly too long and price too high, and the 0.6 will not join. And then you get that the assignment probability under the queue is this blue curve rather than the black curve. And all this area between the curves is loss. It's lower allocative efficiency. I'm not assigning optimally the people above a half. Okay, so what I'm interested in is trying to understand how much loss will I get for a general problem. In a general setting, general economy, not one items and different items, how much loss will there be in the system? Okay. I thought you'll be asking me way more questions. So if things are clear, it'll be good. Okay. So we want to understand this allocative efficiency, given that the prices are going to be fluctuating. And our main result is that we can give you a bound on this loss that depends on the adjustment size. The quantity that matters for like the allocative efficiency or for the loss here is what is the impact of a single arrival. And you can think of like the 0.02 that I put on the previous slide as kind of like being some sort of waiting cost or time scaling. Think of a public housing setting where apartments arrive every day versus when apartments arrive every year. If apartments arrive every year, every time that somebody comes to the queue, the price of the apartment changes by 1 year. That's a big price. So we expect fluctuations to be very significant. And intuitively, it sounds like the loss should be high. And vice versa, if like each adjustment is small, then you might expect that the loss will be lower. And it's kind of like a correct intuition. It's like there's still some details to work out, but that turns out to be the right quantity, and we'll show you a bound of the allocative efficiency loss that pretty much just shows you that depends on the adjustment size. The bound is almost tight. I'm gonna show you a worst case example. And we have some conditions for when the loss is negligible. We can tell you what are the good situations, given a bit more of an understanding of what generates this loss. From a methodological perspective, we're able to get those results by figuring out the connection between the price adjustment and the waiting list and the stochastic gradient descent algorithm. Because we know that those two things are kind of equivalent, and I'll be explicit about this in a bit, we can use the same techniques that you use to analyze stochastic gradient descent to analyze the price adjustment in the waiting list and get the bounds that I just mentioned. And if I have some time in the end, I'll mention a bit about price rigidity. We can think about using stochastic gradient descent, like the waiting list, with an optimal step size, and then that gives you a very natural trade-off between how fast you want to adjust prices, and it can generate some form of price. Yeah. Okay, so I'll be very quick on this slide. Just want to say that there's some literature on matching in hues. Some of my previous work was on that too. A lot of this work was limited to 2 items, because when you go to more than 2 items, you lose tractability. We're going to be able to do any number of items because we use this different approach. And there's, of course, a large literature on using stochastic gradient descent kind of algorithms and price convergence. There's a very limited list of papers here. There's many more that I should have included. The difference between usual TNMR of learning prices and our work is like that in the waiting list, you never converge. You never actually learn the prices and kind of call it a day. We're going to think about a setting where there's continuous price adjustment. In some sense, you can think of the waiting list as something where the learning is never shut off, or the planner may not be sure that the world actually converges, the world may change. Yeah. Okay, so with this maybe too long of introduction, let me just jump, tell you the precise model. We're gonna think about a pretty, what we think of as a plain vanilla allocation and waiting list model. There's going to be a finite number of items denoted by J. The total arrival rate of items is just normalized to 1. That's just the time normalization. And mu J is the probability that, or arrival rate of item J. You can think of this as a supply of item J. What rate do I get items of type J? Agents arrive to go into a Poisson process with total rate lambda. When an agent arrives, I draw the type theta form a distribution. It can be a discrete distribution, it can be a continuous distribution, it doesn't matter. Agents will have a quasi-linear utility. So the utility of agent theta, who arrives to the queue, has to wait W and then gets item J, is the value of agent theta for item J minus waiting cost. That, for the purpose of the talk, you can just think of this as linear, but we can deal with non-linear waiting cost. It doesn't make much difference. There's some technical assumptions. Agents can leave and get a value that's normalized to 0, and the value is bounded. That's basically it. An assignment just specifies for each agent which item.
Can I stop you for a second? Can I ask a small question?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So, like, the items are different or identical?
There's J different kinds of item, but there's many copies of item J arriving.
But like when I join the queue, do I know which item I'm going to get? I need to make the decision whether to join the queue or not, right? Or
Okay, so let me jump to the mechanism that we consider. There's going to be a separate queue for each one of the
okay.
items.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah. So there's J different items. Each one of them has a queue. Each one of them has a first come first served queue.
Okay.
Agents that join a queue just wait in this queue until they are assigned, and there's waiting list mechanisms that have more complicated choices, but like this is a very simple one, and that makes the choice of the agent very simple and very similar to what you do in competitive equilibrium. You just see the different options that you like. You have all the J items. Each one has an expected waiting cost. I make one decision, and that's it. So like if I look at the choice of agents, it's basically equivalent in mathematically to the choices they make in competitive equilibrium. So I'm gonna denote the choice of an agent that observes the state of all the queues by A theta Q, and that's just choosing the agent, the items that gives you the maximal value minus waiting cost. And it will be useful to think of this waiting cost as a price, and I'm just gonna denote it as price. Of course, it's going to be a state-dependent price. Right? The price will depend on the configuration of the queues, how many agents you see ahead of you in each one of the queues. And we can think of this as kind of like sort of similar to competitive equilibrium, except that prices keep moving around. Every time that somebody joins QJ, the price of that queue will go. The price of that item.
So why is this expectation conditioned only on QJ and not on Q?
Because you have a first come first served queue, so the only thing that will matter for it doesn't matter for all purposes, but like if you're joining a first come first served queue, you don't care about anything except how many people are on that queue. But if you had something more complicated, we'll just have a different price adaptation process, and like that would be fine. Like if you condition here by just on the general state of the queues, nothing really changes in our analysis.
Okay.
Okay, so I should just put two notations. When I say W of an allocation, it's just the sum of value per agent that's generated by this allocation. And W opt is the online optimal. And a natural way of calculating how well the waiting list does, if I just think of like, okay, I want to calculate allocative efficiency of this waiting list, want to know how well does it do relative to optimal, we'll just to look at the stochastic process. So here I just made a very simple, very abstract plot where like I have the price of item J on the horizontal axis, price of all other items on the vertical axis. And the price of item J can go up if somebody comes and joins QJ. That will mean one more agent to the queue. That means one kind of increment to the cost of joining this queue. One more increment to the price or adjustment size. If an item J arrives, I will have somebody getting off the J queue, and the opposite will happen, and I will get the price goes down. So if I look at many of those changes, I just have some stochastic process over all the possible points. And in principle, I can calculate everything that I need from just looking at the stationary distribution of this kind of the states of the queues and the implied prices. That's what I did for the example at the beginning, where I just had a simple queue and I showed you the stationary distribution of the queue length. Unfortunately, when there are more than two items, this stationary distribution is not tractable. There's a couple of works in the queuing literature Gideon Weiss, for example, has been very active, and like there's a lot of very nice results, but they also have hardness result about like calculating the stationary distribution. Okay, so we're going to take an approach that does not require us to calculate the stationary distribution. And for that, I just want to introduce one piece of notation, which is this adjustment size or step size. So I guess first I'm going to use WWL to just denote the allocative efficiency of the waiting list, of the waiting list mechanism. And I'm going to use this delta to denote the step size or adjustment size, which is how much the price, the expected waiting cost of an item changes when one agent joins the queue. If I have linear waiting costs, then it's just waiting for one more item. So it's just the expected waiting cost of waiting for one item's arrival. And if I have some items arriving rarely, some arriving, like if I have apartments that arrive, so apartment 1 arrives monthly, apartment 2 arrives daily, then I'll take the max of the two. I can say that this is going to be monthly. That's the maximal adjustment of somebody. It can cause the waiting cost of some item to rise by a month. Okay. Okay. And now I can state our main result. So the result is that the allocative efficiency under waiting cost is at least as high as the optimal allocative efficiency that you can get under any assignment, minus a loss that has some factor that depends on the arrival rate of agents. If lambda is equal to 2, that will cancel to be 1. If like agents arrive twice as often as items, then this just cancels to be 1. And then I get this loss, which is this adjustment size that I said before. So if you think about linear waiting costs, the allocative efficiency of the waiting list mechanism is at least as high as optimally assigning everybody, but making everybody wait for one extra arrival. And I should say this is regardless of the distribution of agent types, agent preferences. It doesn't matter how you scale the values of agents. They're solved for any economy. Intuitively, you can think that this makes sense because let's say that the market clearing price should be 6-month wait. If apartments arrive monthly, the adjustment size is 1 month. Every time that somebody joins or leaves the queue, I can change the price by 20%. That can be a pretty big change. If apartments arrive daily, then I'm going to have a very small adjustment. It makes sense that the loss should be smaller. As I said before, it's not full intuition because I don't know what happens with a sequence of many small changes. But like it's kind of intuitively kind of makes sense that big adjustments should lead to more loss. And I can give you the next thing I want to do is to give you the way that we prove this result, which gives a more refined intuition. Yeah. So before I prove the result, I want to relate the problem to 2 other elements. To just look at the problem, this offline static allocation, and its dual, which will be very helpful. So if you think of just assigning the expected number of items that arrive to the expected agents that arrive, or kind of doing this exercise of freezing people in time, do it offline allocation, you just get the standard static assignment problem that I wrote here. And it's not hard to see that the optimal offline that you can do is actually the optimal online that you can do. And the intuition is just think of doing an online allocation with a price, a fixed price at the market clearing price. Okay? So there's going to be an optimal price for the offline static. If I just make each agent choose the item they would choose under the market clearing price, I will assign each one of the agents optimally. It doesn't matter when they arrive. There's a bit of a delicate queuing balance thing to do there, but like that's basically it. Yeah. Okay. So that's one good thing about the static optimal static. It's a much easier benchmark to work with. The second thing that we use this problem to is to look at the dual. Instead of solving the optimal allocation problem, we can solve the dual problem of finding the prices that minimize the dual objective. So the dual objective that is written here, that's one of the ways to write the dual for the assignment problem. That's like in this particular way would be very helpful for us. And you can think of the dual as being very helpful because it kind of tells you how far away from the optimal the prices are, right? As the queues adjust and randomly evolve to different lengths, we get different prices. How bad is it that when the price differs from the market clearing price? Well, like this dual objective kind of gives you some notion of how good or bad different prices are. Okay, so let's keep those two things in our pockets. And now I'm going to go back to the distribution of queue length. And I have this grid. I have like some stochastic process of price adjustments on it. If I start at time t on the orange dot here, then there's some chance that an agent arrives, chooses some item, and prices of some goods go up. There's a chance that an item arrives, and then the prices go down. Again, whenever I say prices, I mean the expected waiting time for items. Right? So we're going to have the stochastic adjustment process on this grid, where the maximal distance between points in this sort of grid is this delta. And what we want to know is how far it is from the market clearing prices in some sense, right? As I said, you can't calculate the stationary distribution, but if you look at the stochastic process, it actually has some really nice properties. Because if you look at not the random adjustment, if you look at the expected adjustment will look exactly like Tottenham. No? What is the expected adjustment to the queue size from one more arrival? Okay? It's actually like, let's reverse the signs here for a second. Okay? Let me just look at the negative of this thing. Okay? It's going to be a bit more intuitive. If I look at the expected adjustment to the queue length, well, there's some chance that the price will go up because one more guy will join the queue. What is the probability that some guy will join the queue? That's exactly the demand under those prices, right? It's exactly the definition. What is the probability that I'm going to increase the price for item J? Well, that's when somebody chooses to join QJ given the current price, the current length. Okay, so this is exactly the scaled demand of item J. What's the other term? That's the probability that I'm going to decrease the price, and that's exactly proportional to the supply of the item. Okay? So I increase the price or decrease it in proportion to the imbalance between supply and demand. That's exactly what I do in Tanama. And more formally, this is exactly a subgradient of the dual objective. If I look at this dual objective function, you can see that the dual objective has two terms. The derivative of the first term will give me the demand. The derivative of the second term will give me the item correspond to the supply of items. So what I get that although the adjustments are random, in expectation, the adjustment will move me towards the market clearing price. Or more precisely, it's going to be a subgradient of the dual objective. And if I continuously take steps in the subgradient of the dual objective, I expect to get close to the minimizer, which is the market clearing price. Yeah? And that gives us like 2 points of intuition. One is it kind of tells us like we have a stochastic gradient descent here. We should use the tools that are used to analyze stochastic gradient descent. There's a lot of knowledge about those algorithms, so that's useful kind of like direction technically. But it also gives us a lot of intuition for what happens here. So if you want to use a stochastic gradient descent to actually optimize, you will need to take the step size to 0. As you get close to the objective, the step size needs to shrink, so you won't just bounce around forever. But the equivalence is not that we're actually using the stochastic gradient descent as it's easy for optimization. We're using it in this weird way where the step size is just given by whatever it is in the economy. The adjustment size is determined by whether apartments arrive monthly or weekly, and it is what it is. So the weightingness is equivalent to this weird run of this optimization algorithm where you don't actually shrink the step size, you just let it run with a fixed step size for infinity. So I guess now like the reason that the step size or adjustment size is the determinant of the inefficiency, I think is kind of like became pretty intuitive for us once we realized this. And the next thing is just to formally prove this using the techniques for the stochastic gradient descent literature. Yeah. So what we do is we define a Lyapunov function. And the Lyapunov function captures potential. You can think of this as like there's a stochastic process that we can sort of think as a ball rolling and losing speed. And it's there's some friction that causes the ball to lose speed. And sometimes the ball climbs a hill and loses speed, but then it gets the speed back. So like when maybe sometimes I misallocate some items, but that helps me down the line. Sometimes it's just like a bad allocation that I'm never going to get back. And that's kind of like the ball losing speed because of friction. But sometimes I do a bad allocation and that opened up capacity for something in the future. And if I really want to account for that, I need to kind of like look at the value function or look at the sophisticated analysis of the entire dynamics of the system. The Lyapunov function is kind of capturing the potential. It says, well, if you did something that's maybe useful in the future, the Lyapunov function will kind of like capture parts of it, maybe in a bit of a crude way, and that will kind of take care of like the fact that like we climbed the hill now and we're going to get the energy back. That's going to be captured in that. And what it will do, it will allow us to look at each one arrival independently of the entire stochastic distribution of the system and just get a uniform bound of what's the loss for one arrival. Okay. So more concretely, this is the expected value that we get from one arrival. Let it be agent or item. If it's an item, we don't count any value. If it's an agent, we count the value of the agent's the value of the agent and the queue that they choose to join. And that's conditional on some current queue length, at some state qt. We're able to bound it by the optimal allocative efficiency with some scaling that takes care of this agent versus item arrival. Some change in the potential of the function, some change in the Lyapunov function, and then some loss. So we think of this loss as this friction. This changes potential as things we can get back. If we sum over many arrivals, this change in potential will basically cancel out. And if we take an average over many arrivals, we'll just get a constant term that will tend to 0, so we can just ignore this. So once we raise this thing, we're left with a bound that has the optimal allocative efficiency and some loss. And this is a uniform bound. It says, like, no matter what is the state that you're in now, the loss from the next arrival is at most the loss what we have at 2. And that translates to the bound that I had in the beginning. And that's what allows us, this Diaponov function is basically what allows us to get an analysis that does not require calculation of the stationary distribution. Okay. Okay, so 2 more things that I want to do. One is to show you that the bound is almost tight. Yeah, so I had those lambda factors that unfortunately I can't match. But I can show you that in very simple worst case examples, the loss can be the step size. And the example is actually super simple. You can have many items or just one, doesn't really matter. The only relevant thing here is that you take balanced queues. So the way this economy works is that there's agents that only want one specific queue. So you can think of a separate system for each type of agent and a queue for the item that they're interested in. So let's just think of one of those. And there's one queue. All agents have exactly the same value, and they arrive at exactly the same rate as the items do. There's going to be some maximal length of the queue because let's say the value of the agents is 1 here. The waiting cost is C. They're only going to be willing to join if there's less than 1 over C agents in the queue, roughly. I'm ignoring the plus minus 1. What is the stationary distribution of the queue going to look like? This is actually a very simple system. This is just a reflected unbiased random walk. Because the arrival rate of agents and items is exactly the same. So whatever state you are between 0 and the maximum number of agents, you're equally likely to add an agent as to decrease an agent. So within this range, it's just a random walk. Every time it hits the boundaries, it gets reflected. If it hits like the top boundary, it means that you lost an agent, that some agent refused to join the queue and you just lost the value from this agent. How often does that happen? Well, roughly 1 over the size of the queue. Because we have the stationary distribution of the queue, all the states are equally likely. The probability that I'm losing an agent is the probability that the queue is at the maximal size, at the price where agents won't join anymore. That's roughly 1 over the number of agents that can be on the queue, which is 1 over the step size, right? The step size is what determines how many agents can I have in the queue. So roughly when you take the 1 over, you just get the step size again. Okay, so that's a very simple example, but of course there's 2 things that are kind of weird about this example. One is that obviously it's a knife-edge case. It's exactly balanced queue. And the second thing that's of course very related, the market clearing price in this queue is anything between 0 and 1. There's a wide range of market clearing prices. And the queue basically fluctuates between all those market clearing prices. As long as I'm in some queue length that implies a price between 0 and 1, I just randomly drift up and down, and that kind of makes sense, right? Like there's no Tatanamar pressure in any direction. Once I hit the boundaries, I already have the loss. So there's no way of getting pressure that will drive us towards like some internal price without actually incurring some loss. So that kind of like gives you a bit of intuition for when like we should expect examples that are the opposites. Like, should we expect that actually the loss is low? And what we do is we say, let's say that we have a discrete economy, a discrete number of agents. So before I said like the number of items need to be finite, but like now the number of agents also will need to be finite. Generically, if you have finitely many agent types, you'll get a unique market clearing price. Okay, so let's assume that you get a unique market clearing price. A sufficient condition is generalized imbalance, for example. If you do that, then now we get like the opposite result. We get a very low allocative efficiency loss. We get the allocative efficiency is going to be exponentially small in the step size. And that kind of tells you that the situation that I gave you for the worst case is kind of like non-generic. And actually, when you have discrete agents, it tends to help. It's as long as you don't fall on those non-generic parts, like it will actually help you get a smaller loss. Why is this true? Well, for the discrete economy, for the discrete number of agents, I can say that there's a unique, so if I have a unique market clearing price, which I generically have for the finite number of agents, I can actually say more than just have unique market clearing price. I can say there's a neighborhood of prices under which no agent will take an item they're not supposed to. And so, let me, oh, I stopped the sharing. Sorry, just a second. Okay. Okay. So think of a discretization of the economy I had in the first on the first example. Instead of having the uniform 0, 1, I just have 5 types. The value is 0.1, 0.3, 0.5, 0.7, 0.9. Yeah. The optimal allocation is given by those bars. Agents with a value of 0.9 and 0.7 must be assigned. Agents with a value of 0.5 assigned with 50% chance, and there is a unique market clearing price equal to 1/2. And basically here. Okay. Now, not only I have unique market clearing price, as long as the price is between 0.3 and 0.7, all agents are assigned something, they will be assigned under the optimal assignment. Because the agents that have a value of 0.5, they can either be assigned or not. Both of those will be assignments that can happen under the optimal assignment. And as long as I don't assign anything to the 0.3 guys, as long as I don't assign anything to the 0.3 guys, the price doesn't go below 0.3, then I'm fine. As long as I don't go above 0.7 and I keep all the 0.7 guys assigned, I'm fine too. Yeah? So within this range of prices, any agent is assigned something they can be assigned under the optimal allocation. Yeah? More generally, there's going to be some kind of neighborhood of prices around the optimal allocation, such that in any assignment, there's going to be a neighborhood such that all agents will still be assigned something they should be assigned under the optimal allocation. Huh? Second thing is what happens inside this box. Let me jump back to the next slide. Well, if I go beyond the price of 0.5, then now demand is going to be 0.6. If I go just below 0.5, demand, the total rate of agents during the queue is going to be 0.4, which means that once I deviate from the market clearing price, I get pretty strong drift back towards the market clearing price. I don't have an unbiased random walk. I have a biased random walk, a very biased random walk. Yeah. And that also will generally be true that I get some sort of strong bias towards the inwards of this box here. Yeah. Combining those two things together, I say, as long as I stay in the box, I don't do any misallocations, right? Sometimes like those 0.5 agents will get it, not get it. If like I just look at the long time series, on average, they should get it at the right rate because like I just have the supply equal demand, number of items must be equal to the number of agents assigned. So the 0.5 will take care of itself. As long as I don't assign any of the 0.3 guys or leave out any of the 0.7 guys, I'm going to be fine. So as long as I'm in the box, I'm fine. And I must stay in the box because it's really hard to get out of the box. I need to win against the biased random walk. That's going to be exponentially relevant. Taking those two things together, I basically stay in the box almost all the time, and therefore, like the location is almost optimal, or almost maximizing the allocative efficiency. Okay, any questions? Yeah. The last thing I want to say, I guess I have like 3 minutes, is trying to think about this stochastic gradient descent and like waiting list in a bit more general context. Like let's say I have like some planner who kind of wants to be inspired by this waiting list and says, I don't know what prices to set. I kind of like this Tatanama style process. Can I do something that is reasonable with this kind of Tatanama adjustment process? If somebody comes and demands good J, I'm going to increase the price of good J. If good J is supplied, I'm going to decrease the price. That's kind of like a reasonable adjustment process. I wouldn't need to know much about it. I can keep adjusting, and if the world changes on me, it's fine. You know, I'll just keep adjusting and learn the new prices. Can I get this to work in a reasonable way? And of course, we'll need to at least adjust one thing, which is the step size, the adjustment size. We showed that the loss depends on the adjustment size. So the only thing that we want to tweak in here is how big are the adjustments. Okay. Well, if you look at the infinite horizon problem, it would look, you would want to do you would want to do the smallest adjustment size possible. So in order to make it interesting, we say, what if you have a finite adjustment period and you just set the adjustment size, what the adjustment size that you would want to do, and it will this give you a reasonable kind of price discovery process. And we find that in some sense, yes, like this sounds like, I really want to hear your thoughts about whether you think it's kind of reasonable or good algorithm to use, but I think it's actually, it does pretty well for a very simple heuristic. If you just choose the step size to be the inverse of the square root of time, like smaller step sizes, the longer horizon you think you'd be in a stable environment, then you will get about the square root loss, which is in some sense optimal. Like in like Devanur, for example, you get that this is the minimal loss you can get in this kind of price learning with finite horizon problems. And kind of like the intuition is like, you don't want to choose a step size that's too small now, because you're going to start from bad prices. We're going to just arbitrarily start at prices equal to 0. It's going to take some time for prices to approach what the market clearing price should be. Once they kind of like very hand-wavily saying, like once they approach the market price, then you're going to just be affected by the fluctuations. So you're going to have to balance those two things out and kind of choose a step size that will not give you too much loss from the initial convergence, and then not too much loss from the fluctuations once you're roughly converged. And this does it, and we get this loss. That's seems to us like a pretty good number. At the very hand-wavy level, I think this is also kind of like interesting because it seems like it generates some form of price rigidity. So in macroeconomics, there's this kind of question of how do prices adjust in the economy? Should prices adjust immediately when the Fed changes interest rates and we learn something different about demand, or do like businesses underreact to the change in prices or something like that? Like this, I kind of think that this can be an interesting way to think about prices adjustment. In some sense, you can think of stochastic gradient descent as a kind of abstraction of adjustment that people that don't really know the entire world, like they just take some direction, some adjustment steps, and those adjustments may be cautious if you think that's like you may be overreacting to noise. Right? If you think of the previous, if I could choose my step size in the waiting list, I would want to choose a step size that will allow me to learn when I need to learn, but that will be a loss when things just randomly changed. Like if I'm a restaurant and I see 5 more people coming every night to my restaurant, does this mean that I just got random noise this week, or does it mean that demand really changed and I need to increase prices? I don't know, and therefore I should be cautious and adjust prices slowly. So you can get a slow price adjustment process from like thinking about those stochastic gradient descent kind of methods. And I guess I'm basically out of time, so let me just conclude. So we wanted to understand the allocative efficiency of waiting list, where they have this kind of like what we call a price discovery process. The waiting times that are driving the allocations are endogenously learned via a very natural algorithm. We wanted to understand, will this adaptation method will lead you to good prices, to good allocative efficiency? We find that the adaptation process can be seen as an application or usage of the stochastic gradient descent with a fixed step size, and that means that we can analyze it using the standard Lyapunov functions. And then we can see that the random fluctuations do cause an efficiency loss, and we can bound the loss by looking at the adjustment size. How big are the steps that change the price? And we think this is also a very interesting heuristic, price discovery heuristic to look at. Like waiting lists are interesting because they're a very common allocation mechanism, but we think that like the price discovery method here, and the fact that it kind of like is a sensible one, kind of maybe interesting for other contexts as well. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you so much.